Kia ora koutou. Welcome back to This Is Our Story. Thank you for joining us, and welcome back to you, Briar.
Kia
How are you
ora.
doing over there?
Good.
Good. I can see that you're basking in sunshine, or at least something about the light is just bouncing. Flatteringly
It's actually pouring with rain, but the sun's just shining in as well.
Well, I am trapped indoors it's always quite sunny over here in warm in Brisbane, but it's middle of winter, so we get a little bit of cloud over here today. Anyway, let's not dilly-dally. Let's get straight into story time this week, trying to avoid dragging on. I know I have a tendency to talk a little bit too much, but story time today is focused on the topic of church and school memories. So just there are some things that we've been remembering since we begun this podcast. And we knew that some memories would be coming up as we moved through our story, things that we hadn't thought of earlier. But this is just some specific things about church life and school life, which, as we have touched on before, was so interlinked that sometimes it was really hard to tell the difference. So, Briar, you had a particular memory / story you were going to share about a kind of school / church event that we're a part of.
Yeah, I literally just remembered just before how we went to this. I think we only went the once, and I'm not sure why we didn't go again. And I think it was through school. And like you were just saying, sometimes it's hard to remember the memories, whether they were school or church, because they were so closely interlinked. But we'd practiced all year, and we went to this major music competition where you create a band and you go and compete against other schools, I guess.
I think it was mixed, actually. It was like a battle of the bands type thing. And I remember hearing about this, thinking that it was quite cool. And then for some reason, someone at our school or church or something decided it might be a good idea for us, for our youth band, the youth band being those who played music at youth group, so not really a band, decided it might be cool for us to enter and play music at this event.
Yeah, it was quite cool. I remember it being not that kind of heavy feeling of like a churchy vibe. It felt quite young and hip and fun. And I remember we travelled to Whangarei, which is about an hour-ish away from where we were living. And I think we camped over at this big hall, the church there, with lots of other people, sort of marae style, with mattresses on the floor. And then you'd watch all the bands compete, and then you were in the band, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's interesting to say that you were talking about being hip and cool, because we were so far away from being that. Because
it felt like we were hip and cool.
Well, the thing is that the kind of music that we prepared was so different, because a lot of these other bands, they were presenting original songs or maybe covers of rock songs and things. And then we came in super excited about presenting basically church music. and
we didn't get anywhere, basically. That was sort of what happened. We didn't
it was a cool experience, and this is particularly important for me in my growth as a musician, because at this time I was playing drums a lot at church, and I was quite naturally gifted as a drummer, I think, and I was really passionate about it. But there was one particular experience with a particular individual in our quote unquote band, which kind of pushed me towards picking up a guitar for the first time. Big moment for me, picking up a guitar. So we had this guy at school who, he really wanted to, when it came to this particular event, he really wanted to be involved. And we had these auditions for people to join the band.
That's right, I remember that.
Yeah, and so us older students who were a part of the youth band ran these auditions at school for people to join the band. And we had this guy who came along, and he had just been bought a guitar, an electric guitar. He's very excited about it. And so I was like, okay, you know what? Go and do your audition. Terrible. Like legit terrible. Could not play even a chord. Could not strum. No. It was terrible. And so we're like, politely saying thanks for coming along to audition, but I'm sorry, there's, maybe just practice a bit more and come back next time. Anyway, this became a massive political struggle because his mum just lost it.
Well,
And
I'm guessing he went home and cried to mummy and was like, I didn't
totally.
get in.
And she came in a fury at us as students for turning him down, but then complained to everybody, like all the people in charge of the band. So the adult, I think we had parent volunteers and teacher volunteers or something, and complained to the principal. And in the end, we were told that we had to take this guy on. And I'm like, what are we supposed to do with a guy who can't play an instrument?
What was the point of doing the auditions to find
Oh
the
my
best
God, it's so
players?
cringy. So we went through all this whole rehearsal process, and through this whole time, he just could not play the guitar. I mean, can you imagine playing this kind of rock song and then all of a sudden in the background having this ding-a-ding-a-ding, ding-a-ding-a-ding, just random chords about 5 beats behind everybody else, because he would play a chord, he'd learn the chord, play it, and then it would take him like 30 seconds to change to the next chord. And even if you're not a musician, you understand that it just does not work. And this whole time through rehearsals, we're like, oh my God, this is going to be a train wreck. How do we cope with this? But we couldn't do anything. Like no one wanted to mess with this mum. And
could you not mute his guitar?
We talked about it, but then we thought it would just create too many issues. So we got to the event, right? After watching these amazing bands. And then we get up and we're basically like a youth group, like a church band getting up, and you could tell the vibe was so different from our music. And like hundreds of people there. We're playing to hundreds of people, to judges, like a proper professional competition.
Quite
And
embarrassing.
oh Lord. And then there's this guy just strumming random ding random chords at random times. And what I do remember, unsurprisingly, I remember the comments of the judges being, the only things I remember what they said about the music was good drummer, perhaps the guitar was out of tune, maybe come back again next year.
Maybe that's why we didn't actually go back.
Cringe. Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, that was a win for me. My first outside positive review of my drumming. But at that same time, I picked up a guitar before the event, and I just started playing around and seeing if I could figure out the songs on my own. And it turns out, hey presto, I could play guitar. And it was just kind of a real revelation that I had this kind of natural musical gifting, which has obviously stayed with me through my whole life. So in some sense, it was quite a positive experience and hilarious in hindsight, not at the time.
No.
Not hilarious at all.
Well, for the rest of the band, who worked really hard on, the singers working on their harmonies and, making sure everything was going to run smoothly, to then for it to basically be ruined.
Yeah.
It was probably quite heartbreaking.
Yeah. Now I know that I've just taken over your story, but we're going to carry on to part B of the story time, talking more about some church related memories. And I've just been thinking about this recently, just how big it was in church at that time through the 80s and 90s and maybe early 2000s. The whole thing about demons and angels and spiritual warfare and things like that. I don't know if you remember much of this, but growing up in our home church, it was such a normal thing to talk about, which is wild. We battle not against flesh and blood, but of powers and principalities.
I can't believe you remember that.
It just sticks with me forever. And so there was always this rhetoric about fighting spiritual warfare. I don't know if you remember, just to talk about this in youth group and in church.
Yeah, but I feel like it came out of nowhere, as if our pastors or something went to some conference, or it felt very Americanized, because that's, when you watch sort of American preachers, they're very, quite loud and proud about casting the demons. And I feel like maybe they felt inspired after going to, and all of a sudden it was, we were casting out demons and there was big talk about
It's
it,
funny,
wasn't there?
if you're looking for demons, you'll find them.
Yeah, well, that's it.
um,
Everybody's got their demons, right?
yeah. I have a very vivid memory of someone getting prayed for at church and it becoming a very dramatic affair. I was quite young at the time, but some lady got up, and I think in hindsight, I was probably aware of the fact that this particular lady there was a bit of drama attached to her personality.
Mm.
And anyway, I just remember this whole thing, and I remember her screaming and kind of trying to hit the pastor who was praying, and it was like, holy shit, this is wild.
You just sort of sat there
Like, and you're
wide-eyed,
supposed to
like,
just like the whole congregation is just sitting there watching this drama unfold.
do you think it sort of gave the pastors like an ego boost to sort of egg them on to be louder and
Well, I mean,
more
it
forceful
depends on
with
the pastor, I guess. I have
Mm.
some pastors are hugely proud of their
Mm.
ability, for healing and casting out of demons and things like that. It really depends on the person, I think, but definitely in Christianity, there are those who just get a lot of what's the word, meaning out of that, and and a lot of personal drive.
Definitely.
A lot of ambition as well.
Mm.
It's that kind of part of being ambitious within a Christian setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do remember then the pastor explaining how after this had happened, and then explaining that, the laying on of hands was essential, but it wasn't anything. It was really awkward, actually. It wasn't anything to do with him trying to touch her as a woman, and he was trying to keep it appropriate, but it was all about the laying on of hands that was kind of commanded in the Bible to help get these demons out. I was like, this is weird. It was very bizarre. And in terms of like this, the whole angels, demons thing is connected or adjacent to this. I would have nightmares, constant nightmares, almost every night for about 10 years, I think. Just terrifying nightmares. And I think attached to this kind of whole spiritual warfare thing, whenever I talked about it with people, they would connect with that too. Like I had some kind of spiritual presence with me that was creating this in my mind. I don't did you have anything like that happen to you?
I have a vague memory of having a really bad nightmare, and again, it was also associated with demons because the nightmare was. I actually still remember it vividly. I was laid on my bed and I got woken by the sensation of like bugs crawling all over me and spiders and I remember waking up and not like just being absolutely frozen in fear and I guess it was in my mind's eye, I don't know, maybe I was half asleep, but seeing the whole room, all the walls, the ceiling just covered in crawling bugs and they were all over me and it was just terrifying, which of course that just gets related to, oh, it must be, the demons trying to get you or something or infiltrate
Because
you.
naturally
Or,
demons would come through bugs. I mean,
yeah.
some bugs are pretty evil, like cockroaches.
Yeah.
Definitely demons.
But wasn't
Demons
there
with like little wings.
but wasn't there was a likeness? Was it a certain type of bug or
Yeah, I don't know.
I can't remember, but I remember it being, it must be demonic.
Yeah, it's funny how religion uses things like dreams, because they're so hard to understand. We try to find meaning, and outside of church we do the same, obviously. But when you're in church, things that can't be explained they just get ascribed to something spiritual, right? It's just an easy thing to do, to explain something you don't understand, because we're not supposed to understand the spiritual world.
And
we have to be
so
connected with it,
quickly.
right? We have to be constantly connected with the spiritual world. It's expected of us, but we won't understand it. So it was such a weird thing, really.
And then, when you're vulnerable to the brainwashing, you latch on to anything like that. You're like, oh yeah, it must be demons, and that's just how it was in church. You know?
Well, I remember, and I don't know if this is my imagination, but I remember when I was young and trying to sleep, knowing that nightmares were going to be there, I would try and stay awake as long as possible. But every night I used to hear this ticking, and there was no reason to hear this ticking. And in my mind, I attributed that ticking to some kind of benevolent, good presence, like an angel, like this is my angel coming to protect me. And then at some point, somebody, I don't know who, they told me that some people had, they told me that actually some people experience demons as a ticking sound. I'm like, what? So
What?
like it was so weird. Like
It doesn't even
was
make
just
sense.
basically you make these things up in your mind, and when you're so involved in this kind of spiritual terminology, you're so open to just taking on whatever because you
Yeah,
can't explain it, right? So someone provides some kind of explanation, and then all of a sudden I'm
that
believing
must be
that.
it. Mm.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And to kind of move on from that, but obviously related, is the whole topic of prophecy, which was a really big thing at the same time because of these spiritual gifts. Is prophecy everyone knows what prophecy is, like the ability to see the future, and this is one of the biblical gifts that's talked about in the Bible, and therefore people probably seek or sought to have this gifting in their lives because it is one of the primo gifts from God.
Mm.
And we would have speakers who would come around, and they'd have this great mantle of authority and expectation over them, and we would expect great things from them, and them come and do these prophecies on all these people, and this became
And it
a
was
bit.
quite a big deal too if you were picked out. Sometimes they would pick people out of the crowd to be like,
Yep.
God is saying for me to tell you this or whatever, and so
Yep.
they would prophesy it's over your life, and then
Well, I don't know if this is my imagination, but I feel like in the early days, prophecy was a bit more specific. Like they would come up with quite specific things to say about you. Whereas I was in church much longer than you, so I've experienced this a lot. But over the years, prophecy became more and more vague. So you calling somebody out, you're saying something over them that could basically relate to about half of the people in the congregation. Whereas one particular experience that I had when I was young at this church, our home church, was a visiting speaker, and he was renowned for being a prophet or of some level, however you gauge these things. And his prophecy was very specific over me that I don't remember much of it, but I remember this line particularly, that I would be an expert in my field, whatever field that would be, that I would be an expert. And the reason why I remember this so vividly is because it became a defining mantra for me and my life as I went ahead from that moment, because I believed it, of course. And also on top of that, Mum and Dad believed it. And so they would actually remind me of that constantly, that every time I made a decision in my life about a job or going to uni, whatever, was that, you remember that prophet, he said that you were going to be an expert in your field. And it became, when things start to not work out in the way that I thought they would, I became quite disheartened because I just didn't understand it. Why this is supposed to happen to me in this way? I'm supposed to be an expert. By the way, still not an expert in a field. I mean, what is my field? That's a good question. You said that you had prophecy as well.
Yeah, and I can't really remember much apart from that I was going to be an entrepreneur, and same as you, Mum and Dad constantly reminded me about it, but I can't say that I've been an entrepreneur.
How many things have you sold? Although you do use Facebook Marketplace quite a lot.
Maybe that's what they meant. I'm
reselling of real horsey gear on Facebook Marketplace. Wow. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus.
Fulfill the prophecy. But yeah, that was all I really remember from it. And yeah, nothing really came of that, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Lord, to disappoint you for not being an expert. Yeah, no, it's very interesting how that worked out. But I think some of these spiritual gifting type things have fallen a bit out of fashion with the quote unquote modern church, because I think probably society has become more cynical about these types of things. And I think overall we question a lot more than we used to, not just in religion, just in general, right? We just don't believe things as easily, and we are less likely to just jump on some kind of
it feels a little
spiritual
bit.
train.
It feels a little witchcrafty too.
Yeah, it's just fucking weird too. Like I
What
would
is this
read
witchcraft?
books. I don't know if you remember this, but was it Frank Peretti? Like he had this whole series about literal angels and demons fighting it out in this like literal warfare. That was was kind of like Christian fantasy.
Mm.
And these books were massively popular in Christian fiction. And they came out, I think, 90s, early 2000s, and I was fully into that stuff and fully pulled into that. I liked it because it was exciting, and it is exciting to think about these forces fighting for you in a kind of different realm, right? It's hard not to get pulled in by that
Mm.
and to kind of fit it into our human understanding. Another thing was like end times.
Yes.
Yeah, that was about the
Yeah,
same
that
time where
was
people were
huge.
obsessed with like
Mm.
the apocalypse and the end times. You know, there was another series that was a book series. What was it called? But I got really excited about that too. It was just about the end times and the people who are left behind. Was it
Oh
Left Behind?
yes, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Jesus. You know,
Yeah. I'm gonna have to
it's really
Google
into
that
that.
later.
There was even a movie made about it.
Yes.
TV series. Anyway, very if you want to look that up, very entertaining because there was an old movie made back in the 70s or 80s on the being left behind. It's this whole idea that all the Christians in the end of times they get taken up to heaven and then everybody else is left behind. It's based on the book of Revelation in the
And
Bible.
I do remember like whole sermons being dedicated to this, and being made to feel like almost guilt tripping you into being a better person so that you wouldn't be the one left
Left
behind.
behind, yeah.
Yeah, like
So
the pressure.
very strong tenet of Christianity at that time. Again, has fallen out of fashion, and I would say most people in church these days they focus on more of a New Testament kind of gospel type theology, and they kind of skip over the end of time stuff because it's too weird, it's too hard to
Yeah.
understand,
Mm.
and because most people just don't really want to take that on board. It's just some weird shit.
And people used to talk about it, like the end is near, like it's in our lifetime.
Oh
Are you
yeah,
going to be left
totally.
behind?
Yeah, probably our generation are probably the last ones who took that seriously. I don't think I've really seen it in younger generations where they've had these
No.
kind of proclivities to talking about the apocalypse. Maybe just like more climate related
Yeah.
apocalyptic scenarios as opposed to religious end of times.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, these are all very interesting topics, but not not the main topic of this podcast. As per usual, we've jumped down a rabbit hole and taken a few
Got
tunnels,
carried away there.
which is kind of that's what this is all about, though, isn't it? But to jump back into our autobiographical story, this episode is supposed to focus more on your story, Briar. So the last episode we talked a lot about my first year out of home, away from home and going to uni, etc. And I guess now is the time to swivel the camera or the microphone, so to speak, back to you and just kind of talk a bit about what you did, what life was like after I left. Because it was like you became an only child in many respects.
Yeah. And I mean, I was probably at home on my own. I don't know, must have maybe been 2 years. Like maybe you'd been gone 2 years before I left. I can't
That
remember.
sounds about right. Yep.
Yeah, I was 17, I think, when I left home. And I moved down to Wellington, which is a really big deal for someone from a sheltered small town and upbringing to go to the Big Smoke, which was about 12 hours, for those who don't know, from the far north to Wellington's about a 12-hour drive. So it was a long way away. And I remember when I moved down there for study, Mum and Dad took me down there. So I went to nanny school, nanny college.
So, like, just to pause there for a moment, like, what was it that led you to that decision? Because I wasn't around. It was quite a surprise for me at the time to hear that you'd done this because I had no idea that was the direction that you were going in.
Well, so I always knew I wanted to work with kids. That was just a given from a very young age of, I was going to say really into kids, but that sounds wrong. Yeah,
I mean,
you know
you could
what I
say
mean,
that. I can't. But
yeah. So I knew it was going to be childcare, and actually, I assumed I would have gone to the same uni as you did to do early childhood education. You know, like my Bachelor of Teaching, which is what you did, but you did primary, didn't you?
mm,
I always wanted to do early childhood, but because of what we talked about before about the school system we did, the curriculum, I did not feel prepared at all to go to uni. And I just didn't give me the confidence at all. And, you know, for someone like yourself who's quite academic and you struggled too, I think it would have been worse for me because I just wasn't academically minded at all. So I was like, what are my other options? And at the time in Wellington, they were offering this course. It was only a 6-month course, but it was quite intensive. Where you
how
basically,
did you find it?
I
So you
can't
didn't have we didn't
remember.
have internet or anything.
Well, did we? Because in the last year that I was at
Uh,
home, we got a laptop for mum
mm.
because she was studying. So I feel like we may have.
And you also, I think, if I remember this correctly, you were doing more school stuff at home. Is that right? Because
Well, my
you
last
left
year
the
of
school.
school, yeah, because there was some changes. Actually, it's not something we've talked about, but in the last year of school, I think it was after you'd left, but the school, I don't know what happened. They couldn't
Changed
afford to,
hands.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe they couldn't afford to. I can't remember the circumstances. Anyway, they changed the curriculum to a quote unquote secular curriculum, and lots of families, not just our parents, did not agree with it at all. And given that it was my last year in school, I was behind in a couple of subjects. So I'd finished everything apart from, I think it was just maths and English. So I spent my last year homeschooling with another family friend of ours who was younger than me, but she was very good at maths. So she actually helped me immensely. And it was just like treading through mud. I really struggled that last year trying to get through my algebra just to get the. I think I only got like the minimum requirement, which was school C. I think, I don't
Mm.
know what you refer to it as, but that was enough for me to go to nanny college in Wellington, where you're trained to be a nanny. It's quite intensive. You live with a family and then you go in 1 day a week to do the course stuff. But, you know, like we learned first aid and we learned how to look after kids and educate them, etc. So yeah, I moved down there. I moved in with a family who actually I'm still in touch with today, which is crazy because this was 2005, I think it was.
Yeah, that'd be about right.
Yeah, January 2005. Anyway, so I have memories of mum and dad coming down and meeting the family, and they moved me into their house, which was a tiny little single bed in an office. So I had to share my bedroom with their office and their landline. Lovely, lovely family. But yeah, once I'd done the course, they really wanted me to stay. And I probably would have. I really liked working for them, but it was so lonely down in Wellington. I didn't know anybody. And I used to, on the weekends when I wasn't looking after the kids, I just needed to get out because I was in the office. Like I remember on a Saturday morning, you know, the phone would ring or they'd be like, knock, knock, like when I'm still in bed, can I just use the computer for a bit? And it was just an invasion of my privacy. So I would get up,
'Cause it was in the
um,
hut, right? In Lower Hut.
yeah, lower hut, and I used to get up on a Sunday morning and somehow I'd found this church. I can't remember how I'd found it, or maybe mum and dad found it for me, but
That sounds
it
more
was one of those, yeah.
realistic.
Well, being 17, I wasn't even an adult. It's when you think about it, it's quite young to move out of home and expect to be adulting. Anyway, so I'd go to this church, and it was a huge church, one of these massive ones where you just get totally lost in the congregation. And you know, they were friendly. They'd sort of greet you at the door, and so, you know, recognize that you're new. But I didn't make any friends there. And straight after church, I'd go to the mall. I would get a butter chicken curry, and I would go and watch a movie. And that was what I used to do every single Sunday for 6 months because I was so lonely. And
Having lived in Wellington, I can kind of imagine that, because especially where you were living in the hut, well, what's colloquially called the hut, the
yes,
Hutt Valley, is a little bit more removed from the CBD area, which is where more people will go. And I think unless you know people there, Wellington can be really difficult
yeah,
to navigate. Not physically navigate, but just to kind of fit in.
mm,
It's a small city,
yeah.
but when you came from a country town,
It
you
feels
know,
massive.
yeah.
Yeah. And even like navigating the train system, I'd never been on, never had to catch a train before, and I had to
Well, just
commute.
public transport. There's
Yeah,
no public
well,
transport in Kitty.
yeah. So I was having to, on my course days, I was having to get on the train into the city, which was, I don't know, is it like 20-ish minutes, 20, 30
Yeah.
minutes into the city, and then I had to walk from there quite far into the city and go do my course. And the girls on my course were really lovely, but again, I didn't connect with them because,
Well, it was only one day. How many days a week was it?
well, it was one day a week,
Yeah.
1 or 2 days a
Not
week.
really enough time to kind of make
No,
friends.
not really. And not only that, I was used to having hand-picked friends, in a Christian circle, and this was my first experience out of home, so I didn't really know how to socialize with people that weren't Christian or into the same things. So I just didn't really connect with anybody there. They were talking to me about going out and getting drunk and sleeping with so and so, and I was just like a deer in headlights. I didn't know how to relate. Well, I couldn't relate to them. So yeah, those 6 months kind of flew by. I did end up hanging out with, so the mum of the family. We actually got on quite well. She was quite a bit older than me, but we got on quite well. And her sister, who was younger, again, who was quite a bit older than me, we used to hang out with the kids that she nannied, and she was probably a lifesaver, really, because without her, I don't know, I might have even have pulled out the course. It was just deep, deep loneliness. It was awful, horrible time. And also on top of that, Wellington, again, for those who don't know, is a cold place. It can just make
Pretty
you feel
miserable.
really, yeah, it can
It
make
kind
you
of
feel really
heightens that
depressed.
sense of loneliness.
Yes, absolutely. So, there were times where it would just be so cold and wet. You didn't want to go outside, so you didn't, go meet people. And anyway, so after those 6 months, I said, oh, actually, so when I first moved in there, mum and dad, particularly mum, had spoken to the the family, the parents, and said basically they made them babysit me basically, and was like, "This is our rules. She's not allowed boys in her room." Um,
Really? I
yeah,
didn't know this.
yeah, it's seriously embarrassing. And even
Uh,
so, the mum of the family said to me, like, "This is really weird," but she told me to like, I'm glad that she told me that, because we ended up being quite close, and I was like, "Oh, that's weird. Like, I'm an adult now. I've left home."
mm.
But yet there was these strict rules still, even though I wasn't living in our parents' house, there was still rules.
Did you drink at all?
Nah, didn't drink, but I was seeing someone who I met through you.
Mm.
I don't know, maybe the year before, when one
Hmm.
of your friends that you'd brought up with you from Tauranga one year and had set me up with. So we were kind of loosely dating, which is weird
By
because
setting up, it was like it just kind of happened.
no,
He was there and you were there. I
no,
didn't
you
like it.
you and your partner at the time deliberately set me up. Don't tell me it was an accident. You deliberately set us up to go on a date, because I remember the date. Anyway, this guy was 10 years older than me, and which is weird that we were dating, because he lived in Tauranga, I lived up north, and then I moved to Wellington, so it was very long distance. But anyway, he used to come visit me in Wellington, and because I was staying with this family in a tiny little office, you know, embarrassingly, the mum of the family was like, "Oh, just remember, you got to leave your door open." And she was only doing what she was told, basically,
Yeah.
because you don't argue with our mum. So we used to go out and spend the whole day out, and probably do things that we shouldn't have been doing.
Ooh.
But um,
Have not heard any of this before.
no, it's probably not for the podcast. But we, I just moved out of home, and I didn't want those tight rules all the time. I wanted to feel
I mean, who
free.
does?
Yeah, but like, when you move home and you're finally like, oh, not right there, your parents, you kind of want to, feel that freedom. And so, yeah, that was sort of my time there. And then
At that
I,
time, though, like, because you obviously went there to study, but were you looking ahead in terms of your work prospects? Because, I mean, New Zealand, you wouldn't naturally think of it as a place where you might start a career as a nanny.
well, actually, at that time in Wellington, it was quite popular, probably because that's where the nanny school was. So lots of families, every 6 months they would get a new nanny that they would sort of like a host family. Sometimes the nanny would stay on, other times not. And to begin with, I thought that I would just stay in Wellington and work as a nanny. But after the 6 months there and feeling really lonely and depressed, I sort of didn't know really where to go. And I chose Tauranga because that's where you were. And I was like, I know people there because.
And this guy was there, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. And, because of the time that I'd spent in Tauranga when we'd come to visit you, I had sort of made a few friends there and I'd been to your church there. And so it just felt like that was the place to go. So I moved to Tauranga.
So, you didn't have work set up there, though, right?
I was working or maybe not to begin with, but I definitely went into not as a nanny, I worked in a daycare, or several different daycares actually. And I think I was relieving because that's the only work I could get at the time.
Mm.
And I was young. I didn't have the teaching degree or Bachelor of Teaching that you would need to be like a qualified teacher to work in a daycare, but it was a job and I was much happier there in Tauranga than I was in Wellington. So,
But like, how did it feel for you? Because obviously a lot of different new things happening at the same time. And while you had started this new relationship, you were doing it by distance. So it was very different feeling. So now you were all of a sudden in Tauranga in the same place. And also I was there as well. So it was kind of like a little piece of home, but also a piece of something completely new.
Well, yeah, it was weird because I guess when I first moved up, I moved in with you. That was the first place I think I.
Really?
I think so. Or maybe I'd been somewhere else. I don't know. I had a few different flats and flatmates, and I was spending a lot of time with my boyfriend at the time.
Because I remember personally finding that really weird.
Yeah.
Because you and I, we weren't close at all at this time. We didn't spend a lot of time with each other. But then again, you were dating this guy who was kind of one of my friends.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I don't have many memories of that time, but I do remember the awkwardness.
Yeah, we didn't stay together that long after that. So basically, what happened was, I think I used to stay at his flat. Like there was a guy's flat, and I must have just slept on the couch or something. And one morning, I got up to wake him up. It was really late, and I was like, "Come on, can we get up and do something?" And he threatened to hit me. And I just walked out, and the other guys in the flat took me out for a drive to Rotorua that day and was like, "That's disgusting. You shouldn't have done that." And I was really immature, and I told mum and dad, and this is so embarrassing. They wrote a letter and sent it to him,
Jesus,
via post.
I have the vaguest memories of this.
And I can't remember exactly what it said. I don't think I got to read it. The guy that I'd left, he told me, "Oh, your parents sent me a letter." But yeah, it was basically saying, "Don't go near our daughter again," blah, blah, blah. And that was humiliating for me. I'm like, really sorry.
Really? I mean, like, you can kind of admire the fact that they're obviously yeah. Obviously, they want to do their best for you. Obviously, as a young adult trying to solve your own problems.
Yeah, and I honestly didn't know they were going to do it. And I was quite surprised when he told me that they'd sent a letter because I thought I'd already dealt with it. I'd broken up with him. But it was quite intense. anyway. Like, he was 10 years older than me. I was, I don't know, 17, so he must have been 27. So he was wanting to like get married and have kids and stuff, and I was like, whoa, like I'm not ready for that. Like, I'm not your girl. Like, I've got to move on from this.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think
um,
like this is where you were different from me because I didn't know what I was doing in relationships, but you seem to navigate this part of life more easily than I did because regardless of how naive you thought you were, you at the same time you were still strong enough to kind of deal with that shit and move past it. And you knew when it was time to say break up. I couldn't break up. I didn't know how to. It was
but
too
it's
much
not
pressure
like
on me.
it's not like I had experienced that before. It was just kind of I knew that he shouldn't have been even threatening to hit me. So I was just like, that's it, we're done. Like, it was quite cutthroat, and I don't remember being caught up on him or anything. I just kind of moved on from that.
Mm.
There's no. I think he found it harder than I did. I was just like, no, bye.
So
um,
like, so how old did you find kind of fitting into the church life? Because this, and I think this is probably where there was probably a bit of resentment on my part because I'd gone to this place, this new city, and I'd started a new life from scratch, and I
mm,
didn't want to have anything to do with home. And
mm,
then all of a sudden, you were there
I
in my
I rocked the
space,
boat.
and I think, I don't know if you were trying to, but I felt that there was an expectation from you that you would just be able to fit into my life again. And I know from memory, I did resent that, and I didn't really want anything to do with you.
Well, we still didn't really hang out or anything. Like, I would go to your church and you wouldn't really speak to me or anything. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like you were just another person there. I remember going to your church, and I had, like I said, knew a few people from previous interactions, but it still was quite a lonely time when you first, go to a place and you're trying to make connections, and and that church was quite different to what I was used to as well. It was very, compared to the church we grew up in, very modern, and like the band was really cool, and there was lots of good-looking people, and it just felt like I didn't really fit in anywhere because I wasn't cool enough, I wasn't pretty enough, and that's what that church felt like. And even like what we used to call cell groups, and for people who don't know what a cell group is, it's basically people coming together outside of church time to connect with others, to pray, to talk things through.
More
Um,
like a devotional group almost,
yeah,
more
and
based on that smaller community model.
and someone would run the group and talk. I guess kind of like a mini sermon in a way, but it was a lot more intimate, and so you could talk. So that's, I guess, where I met more people, and then I ended up moving to different through a different bunch of flats with some girls, and it didn't always work out. But yeah, I moved quite a bit actually in the time that I was there.
I
Um,
think like in terms of church life, I think this was just my impression, but it felt like you were just going through the motions of it. Well, I was aspiring to be as involved as possible, like
mm,
I decided to make this my life, and to commit 100% to being in the music team, being in youth, like being a leader, and all those type of things.
See, I
You
didn't have
just
those
attended,
aspirations. Yeah,
and
I
you, I mean, I think I probably viewed this as a negative thing at the time that I was ambitious, and that's a very strong personality trait
mm,
of myself that I recognize that I am ambitious
and that's where we're
and I
very different
strive.
too.
And it's
Mm,
just funny how I applied that. I wouldn't recognize it as an ambition at the time because people in church are not supposed to be ambitious,
mm.
because it's all about the community and it's all about bringing glory to God. But I know that I was ambitious, and so I was going hard, trying to push myself to be the best. Only in hindsight can I identify that, but for
Whereas
sure,
I was just trying to fit in and find my
yeah,
feet. So I
following.
felt a bit, yeah, and that's who I was, too, a
Mm,
follower, and I didn't know sort of who I was or where I should be or what I should be doing. So
mm,
yeah, like you say, I was literally just rocking up, and this is again just how we were brought up. Like, you were just expected to attend church whether you wanted to or not. You just had to be there every Sunday, and read your Bible and do this and do that. So I guess I just kind of carried on with that, thinking that maybe the connection would come.
Mm.
I don't know.
Did you visit home much? As we covered in the last episode, I know that I didn't, only a couple of times. But did you go home?
I really don't remember going home at all. I know Mum and Dad came down to visit, but I can't remember going back because I only had a little car, which wouldn't have.
So I remember you drove. I didn't drive, right?
Yeah.
But you got your license before I did, which I was very jealous about.
I had my license before I even left home. So I was 16-ish when I got my full license. No, I had my restricted, which meant I could take a fully licensed driver in the front, but otherwise you had to be on your own.
Mm.
Yeah, I didn't get my full license till I was in Tauranga, actually.
Mm.
Yeah, so
at what point did you meet your future partner to be? Because this was around about this kind of time, right?
yes, so my first boyfriend, I think we must have only been together maybe 8 months, like not even that long. And where he was living at the time, it was
Which is incidentally
flat.
where I lived. I lived in that flat
Yeah,
with all those guys, and so
was that at the same time though? I don't know.
For the first guy, no. I moved in after that. But then you were just going through the flatmates.
No. So yeah, I met this other guy who
I'm actually, you know what? I just remembered. I moved into his room downstairs.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it was after then. Yeah, because I don't remember ever seeing you there. But they were all like a nice bunch of guys, and I hung out there quite a bit because often on a Sunday after church, it was sort of, you'd all get together with your mates and you'd bring hot chips around and chicken and coleslaw and buns, and you'd hang out together and watch movies or whatever. So I knew this other guy through those sort of interactions, and when I broke up with my first boyfriend, he was there. He was a really nice guy. And I don't
Funny
mean
how that happens.
I don't mean that like I just fell into his arms. It was like I enjoyed his company, and we, I think, had a lot more in common than my first boyfriend, and we just sort of clicked. And then from then,
because it wasn't long after, right?
No, and it was super awkward because my ex lived upstairs and then this guy lived downstairs. It was super awkward. But luckily, because his room was in the basement, I didn't have to go upstairs and see this other guy because that's probably quite cruel. But yeah, we just spent all our time together pretty much. We'd go out adventuring, and
because he was also someone that he attended church but wasn't really super involved. And so in that sense, I didn't really see you guys a lot because you would come to the service but then go off and do things, and you were kind of like on the edge of the friendship circle.
Yeah, and I don't really remember too much of those early days, but I just know that we just spent like every moment together, mostly because I didn't have friends really, more acquaintances through the church, and I never really felt super connected to any of the people in that church. And then at some point, I can't remember when, or maybe you want to pan the the camera, so to speak, over to you and talk about that same time with you and your relationship, because I moved in with you and your partner, so maybe you would.
Yeah. Well, because I think probably in our next episode we're going to focus. This might be perfect time to kind of draw this particular episode to a close, because our next episode will be focusing more on relationships, both of our relationships, which became a massively defining part of our 20s, alongside all the other church stuff and work stuff. That those kind of things were almost like sideshows to the relationship stuff that we were going through at that time. So probably best to focus on that as a topic in itself. But just to kind of wind up this particular one, in terms of like looking back now, your life in Tauranga at that stage, do you think that you were happy to have moved there? Because I know that I was when I left, I was super excited to get out into the world. It wasn't a big world in New Zealand or Tauranga for that matter, but I had always been obsessed with leaving. Whereas I guess you had just left because it was one of those things that you had to do. But how did you feel about being in Tauranga itself?
Oh, I was much happier in Tauranga than I was in Wellington. It was such a contrast, and I loved being, like the lifestyle in Tauranga is quite different because it's by the beach, lots of socializing happening. Although I didn't really have friends, I used to hang out and with groups of people, and they're all friendly, just not my friends. We used to go hang out at the beach and have picnics there and go walk up the mountain. I just loved that lifestyle a lot more than I did in Wellington. But, the loneliness was still there because I still hadn't really connected, apart from my partner, hadn't really connected with anyone. So it wasn't like it was, it still had its blemishes, but I was still much happier there than I was in Wellington.
Do you think from this period of time, though, that there are things that you've, just if we can just like reflect on how, I mean, we were touching on this offline, just about who we are now. Do you think or what do you think would have been a key thing that you took away from those early years in Tauranga, away from home, that perhaps might have stuck with you over the years?
Ooh. I think I learned to be resilient, to be honest. It's probably like this for any young adult moving out of home, but just learning how to navigate life and meeting new people and being let down by people, and you're navigating that on your own, in your own head. You don't have anyone there to support and guide you through those times. So I think that's probably a time where I really learnt about being strong, and that's something probably that's sort of stuck with me. Even though I wouldn't say I was confident, I think I was strong.
Mm-hmm.
And
Probably stronger than me, to be honest, because I think you were more as independent as I thought I was. Somehow I jumped straight into a situation where I was in a relationship where I became the dependent, even though I didn't want to be. It just happened. And then I became stuck in that situation for quite a long time, whereas you weren't.
And I think probably more a reflection on my personality. Even in growing up in those early years, I was quite a stubborn, determined person who wanted her own way, and that probably served me well in a way, like those traits, although you learn to manage them a bit better as you get older. I think those traits probably helped me in those early 20s when I'd left home.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we'll call it a wrap for now, but then in the next couple of episodes, we're going to be focusing possibly in separate episodes or over 2 episodes on my relationship journey, as I very briefly touched on in the last episode, and then also touching on Briar's relationship journey, which, as we just mentioned, were very key factors in kind of the direction that we headed off and kind of affected like the next 10 years of our lives. So a lot of stuff to unpack there, but very interesting things to come. So stick around for those, and join us again next time on This Is Our Story. So yeah, thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you again. We'll talk at you, talk at you very soon. So yeah, thanks, and see you again.
Soon.